My pleasure. Good afternoon, everyone. Brian Van Flandern. For those who, I've done a lot of STANY events, except for just one, I think, right, Jim? So some of you guys know me or you've seen me around. For those who don't know me, I am a professional mixologist. The Food Network calls me America's top mixologist, and I've written 5 award-winning cocktail books, opened per se for Thomas Keller, and a long list of accolades. But at the end of the day, I'm just somebody who really likes to make a good tasting cocktail. And so today I thought we'd share that with you. But before we get in there, we're gonna make an interesting variation on the classic mint julep. We're gonna call it a dashed mint julep. And thank you, Dash, for my Waterford Crystal um, beautiful cocktail shaker. I'm gonna say Dash is the financial services for the mixologist on the go. But anyway, here's what's going on. I actually met Jim at this Goldman Sachs event years ago, and I had just gotten back from China in Shanghai actually, and somebody had approached me about importing Chinese baijiu to the United States. I've never heard of baijiu. It's the #1 spirit consumed in the world per capita. And it is actually, it's usually made from both wheat and a grain, an artisanal grain called sorghum. And I had been playing around with it. It's a phenomenal grain. And I said, you know what? This would make for a really great American style whiskey. So now Goldman Sachs brings me onto this New York event with Rostani. We're having a great time. I'm making cocktails for people. And Jim introduces himself. I'm making a nice cocktail. He goes, oh my gosh, the great cocktails. So it's all about balance. We're going to talk about in a second. And then I said, and he says, let me ask you a question. If you were ever going to make a spirit, a distilled spirit, what, and we got on the topic of whiskeys. If you're ever going to make a real good whiskey, what kind of grain would you use for that? Now, the big four in the industry are barley, wheat, corn, and rye. Barley, wheat, corn, and rye. And occasionally you find something using oats. And today people are starting to use things like millet and quinoa, which is really weird. But I sat there and said, you know what I'd like to do? I'd like to make a great American whiskey made with sorghum. And I swear Jim's jaw hit the floor. You should have seen him. His jaw went slack. He goes, hold on a second, hold on. And he runs away. And he comes back about 5 minutes later with Glenn Poe. And Glenn said, he says, tell him what you told me. Tell him what you told me. I was like, I'm totally confused. I don't know the context. I said, well, he asked me if I was going to make a whiskey, what I would do. I said, I want to make a great American whiskey using this grain called sorghum. And Glenn looks at Jim, and Jim looks at Glenn, and he's like, I swear I didn't say anything. And apparently, these guys were sitting on a huge crop of sorghum and trying to find out what to do with it. I said, well, let's make some whiskey, gentlemen. And we did. And we made some really cool, this is the original James F.C. Hyde. I don't want this to be an infomercial for James F.C. Hyde whiskey. But if you haven't gotten a bottle, pick up a bottle. This rye is one of my favorites. It's a blend of rye and sorghum. And sorghum is naturally sweet. It actually finishes almost like an aged rum, but with the rye, it's a beautiful combination. And so enough of that. Let's get into cocktail today. Today's cocktail is called a Dashed Mint Julep. Now, the mint julep is traditionally served in a julep cup. You can use a rocks glass. It doesn't make too much of a difference. The history is really fascinating, so I won't mind sharing with you. When we think of a mint julep, most of us think of we got some feedback there. Somebody keep their microphone. Traditionally, the mint julep, we think of the Kentucky Derby, and we think of bourbon. They, of course, the mint julep bourbon. Yeah, that's very common. However, the reality is, up until 1875, the mint julep was originally made with cognac, and as was the French 75 and the Sazerac, 2 cocktails today that are made with gin and rye whiskey, respectively. So you say, what happened? Just very briefly, in 1875, there was a blight in Europe called phylloxera. It was actually a little parasite, and it wiped out 98% of the grapevines in Europe. 98%, almost completely destroyed the wine industry. And it was a hardy Texas grapevine. We think the Americans actually introduced phylloxera, so oops, sorry about that. But then Texas and their grapevines actually saved the industry by grafting on these more hardy Texas grapevines onto the remaining European delicate grapevines. And from that point forward for about 40, 50 years, really almost 100 years, cognac and other grape-based distillates became prohibitively expensive to use in cocktails. And that's why you rarely see cognac-based cocktails. The one we all know is the sidecar, but and which remains to this day, but very few other common household name cognac-based cocktails. But oddly enough, the mint julep was originally made with cognac. Today, I want to make it with whiskey because that's what we're used to and that's what Americans love, and besides, we love our great American whiskeys. But I'm going to add a splash of cognac as a modifier, and you'll understand the proportions in a second. And it gives another element of depth and complexity. It's really quite yummy. So our ingredients today, obviously, we need mint, fresh mint. I'm going to use a little bit of cane sugar syrup. This is simple syrup. It's easy to make at home. It's 50% sugar, 50% warm or hot water. Just stir it until all the sugar is completely dissolved so it's clear, and then put it in the refrigerator. And you can use it. It'll last in the refrigerator indefinitely. I usually recommend 2 to 3 weeks maximum, at which point it might start to take on some of the refrigerator smells. So, but it's cheap enough to make, and you should always have it at your bar. A little simple syrup will help you balance your cocktails in it. And we'll talk about that in a second. Obviously, the other thing we're going to use is fresh squeezed lime juice. Now, traditional mint julep might have a lime wedge, but it's just sugar and whiskey with fresh mint. We're actually going to add lime juice to our cocktail, and if you're going to do that, make sure it's fresh. Fresh makes all the difference. Most of you get that intuitively, but if you're not truly convinced on how big a difference it makes, get yourself a fresh pineapple and one of those small cans of Dole pineapple. Squeeze that pineapple. It's a bit of a pain, and then strain it out, and then drink that pineapple juice, and then take a sip of the Dole. The Dole canned juice, it's unpalatable. And don't get me wrong, I'm not busting on Dole. Dole's famous for their fresh pineapples. You can get them at the grocery store. But that canned stuff has a very tin metallic flavor, completely unpalatable once you try fresh. The Italians say that citrus, fresh lime, lemon, grapefruit juice is golden in the morning, silver in the afternoon, and bronze in the evening. And that's because within the first hour of squeezing fresh squeezed lime, it changes, the acidity changes, the sugar levels change, and it starts to oxidize. And just like a great wine, once you've opened it up, the clock starts ticking. And by the end of the day, 12 hours later, your lime juice is on the tail end. It doesn't mean you can't still use it. You just need to balance it out with additional sugars. I'm going to tell you how to make these great cocktails with whatever recipe you have, how to make those great restaurant cocktails at home and make them taste consistently great every single time. All right, so we've got lime, we've got sugar, we've got mint. Then we're going to use our whiskey. Today, I wanted to use the James F.C. Hyde Sorgho Rye. So this is a rye content with a little bit of sorghum blended into it. And the rye provides a little bit of spice to it. So it gives a little spiciness. And the sorghum gives it that sweet notes. And then, as I say, it finishes almost like a nice dry rum. So the rye, you got whiskey and rum notes going on. It's just complex and yummy. And then we're going to top it off with a little bit of cognac. Today I'm using a Remy 38 and Remy Martin. You can use anything, Hennessy, whatever you got at home. Use a VS or a VSOP cognac. You don't have to use anything terribly expensive, but make sure it's a cognac, not a brandy. All cognacs are brandy, but not all brandy is cognac. And the big difference is that if it's a no-name brandy, they can and often do add caramel or sugars or other byproducts after distillation, which will contribute to your hangover in the morning. Cognac, by law, is allowed to add a touch of caramel, but they don't add a ton, and they only do it for color adjustment from year to year because they're all about blending the old stuff with the new and making a very consistent, very homogenized product, which is delicious. All right, so how do you put it all together? Well, I recommend that you build it in the glass, and today I'm going to use my Waterford Dashed shaker. The first thing you do whenever you build a cocktail, most bartenders, you say, what do you do first? They say, add the ice. No little tick of the trade, you always add the ice last. Because the second you add the ice, the clock starts ticking. It starts melting. So why not just put in you build from the least expensive to the most expensive ingredients, or you want your mixer, which are non-alcoholic ingredients, your modifier, and then your base spirit. And that way you can make a mistake anyway along the way, you can throw it out and you haven't wasted all that product. A little tip of the trade. So first thing I want to do is I want to add some fresh squeezed lime juice. And I can make it's called a knuckle cracker, ouch. You go ahead and put a lime in there and you squeeze fresh squeezed lime in there. And through the magic of Zoom, I go ahead and squeeze some fresh lime. So I'm going to go ahead and just do that. This was squeezed less than an hour ago, less than half an hour ago, quite frankly. And I'm going to make enough for 2 cocktails. So this would normally be about 1.5 ounces. I'm going to add about almost 3 ounces of fresh squeezed lime juice to making 2 cocktails. So I'm just doubling up my recipe. Then I'm going to add an additional 1 ounce. I'm going to add my fresh mint. Now, when you talk about fresh mint, you want to keep it fresh. Put it in some water. Think of it like a flowers. Put some ice water in there, nice, chill it down. Put your mint in there, wet it off. What that'll do is it's just like flowers in a vase. It'll perk them up and keep them light and fresh. I'm going to take some fresh mint I've already picked, throw it in there, and then I want to muddle that mint. Now I've got a professional bartending muddling stick, but if you don't have one at home, you can always use the back handle of a spatula, wooden spatula, whatever you got lying around the house. The idea is to crush and turn. So you're twisting and crushing and twisting and crushing. And there's 2 schools of thought on mint. One is that you just lightly muddle it to extract some of the oils. You don't want to get any of the bitterness. Just like making mint tea or any tea, you don't want to steep it too long because it'll extract all the bitterness out of it. However, if you understand the principles of flavor profiling, as we're going to discuss today, you can have a little bit of bitterness and balance it out with just a touch of sugar, and then it's delicious. And there's nothing wrong with that. It just adds another layer of complexity. So I like to really crush it, really extract as much of the oils, make it really minty, delicious. And that way, so it should go from a light green to a dark forest green as you bruise the leaves and get those oils out of there. Now, notice I didn't add the spirit yet. If you add the spirit before you muddle the mint, you'll find that the leaves tend to float at the top, and it's really hard to get them down the bottom. It's hard to get leverage on them with the muddler. So always add the lime juice, then the mint. Then I'm going to add a little bit of simple syrup, sugar water. I can measure that out. As a general rule of thumb, I set up about 3 ounces of lime juice. I'm going to use about 3.5 ounces of simple syrup. Always a little bit more sugar than acid. And by acids, I mean fresh lemon, fresh lime, cranberry juice, whatever your acid is. Sugars can be simple syrup, they can be honey, they can be anything you can think of, anything that's sweet. So it can be fresh juices or whatever, but they all have different Brix levels, different sugar levels, but as a general 1-to-1 simple syrup, a little bit more than your base acid. Then we're going to add our modifying spirit. In this case, our modifying spirit is going to be Willie Martin cognac. I'm going to add about 1/2 ounce of that for 2 cocktails. It'd be 1/4 ounce for 1 cocktail. And then to that, we're going to add our James F.C. Hyde Shogho whiskey. And I guess I was supposed to plug my book at some point. Whiskey Cocktails has a great James F.C. Hyde. Don't worry, I don't make any money off of them, but if you want to get a copy on Amazon, it's a really cool book. And now I'm teaching you how to make these great cocktails. You can get these cocktail books online, follow those recipes, and I'm going to tell you how to make them great every single time. And then I'm going to add about 2 ounces, I'm going to add 3 ounces of the James F.C. Hyde whiskey. This one I'm using the rye whiskey. Okay, so now I've got a nice little cocktail here. I'm going to add some ice to that. But before I do, I'm going to tell you that key I mentioned earlier. I want all of you to remember this in your mind. Just remember this little mantra: acid, sugar, and alcohol. Very simple mantra, those 3 words: acid, sugar, and alcohol. Now that we know our sugars, whether we're using honey or maple syrup or demerara or Splenda or Sweet and Low or just cane sugar, okay, your simple syrup or whatever, you have your acids or lime, lemon, grapefruit, of course, cranberry. You can use balsamic vinegar, you can use ascorbic acid, vitamin C, why not? Anything that's acidic, jalapeno peppers, chipotle chili powder, they're acidic. We can add any acid you can think of as long as it's digestible. no sulfuric acid, but anything else you can add in there, and then add sugar and balance it out. And the last thing, of course, is alcohol. So whenever you make a recipe, follow that recipe exactly as it's written, and then taste it. And you ask yourself these 4 questions, and they're really easy to remember. Is it too tart? Is it too sweet? Does it have too much alcohol or not enough alcohol? Then you simply adjust in the right direction, and you're going to get closer to a great tasting cocktail. If you use fresh ingredients, you use quality spirits, you will always have a great tasting cocktail. Simple, right? Okay, so let's add our ice. First thing I want to do is add my ice to the glass. Normally in the julep cup, it traditionally calls for crushed ice, but mixologists like to use larger ice cubes. And we like to think of the ones in your grandmother's freezer, those big trays, the big chunky, clunky ones. We like big squares or big cubes, and the reason we like those is because the greater the size of the cube, the smaller the rate of dilution, the slower the rate of dilution. And we want to control the rate of dilution. The trend in cocktails nowadays, most of us grew up with cocktails that were really strong or really sweet or both. And what we want to do is make a cocktail that is balanced, that is not too strong or too sweet, but has enough acidity to balance out the sugar and enough alcohol that it's just slightly higher than a glass of wine, about 18 to 22% alcohol by volume, as opposed to 10 to 12 for a glass of wine. So then we're going to put our finger on top and say, shake it, don't fake it, and smile. Up and down, back and forth. And you're shaking that down. You notice that most bartenders are like, and they start pouring for you. If you go into a bar and they're doing that, they're not doing it right. Jim will tell you, Jim's been to every decent bar in New York City, and he'll tell you that the best bartenders, they really shake it down. That makes a big difference. It gets it nice and cold, and it brings that dilution rate down to where we want to drink it. Now, I always like to double strain, especially because I've got mint in there. That double strain is going to catch your mint leaves. It's also going to catch those little tiny ice chips. Now, most of us love those ice chips. We like them floating on top. And the reason we like those ice chips floating on top is because that cocktail is too strong. It wasn't properly shaken down and doesn't have the proper rate of dilution. And so those ice chips continue to melt in our drink and keep it cool while we're drinking it down when you're drinking a 6 or 8 ounce martini, which is ridiculous. A proper cocktail should be 4 ounces, chilled, no ice chips. We're going to continue to melt and dilute. There should be about 4 ounces, and now you've got a great tasting cocktail, which you can consume quickly. And if you want another one, go ahead and order another one. You can order it in advance if you like. So now, shake that out. I love it when it comes out just right. And pour that back. All right, here's somebody talking in the background there. Is that okay? Somebody, never mind. So our garden.
Been hurting with this name, but I'll take whatever I can get this week or any other week.
Someone's got CNBC on.
I'm trying to mute people. If everybody can mute themselves, I'm trying to mute people, but mute. I know you're mute. Unmute yourself. Brian, you're muted. I gotta figure out. I'm gonna unmute you. I'm gonna ask you to unmute. You're gonna have to unmute yourself. I'm sorry.
As Brian unmutes himself,
I'm unmuted.
Yep, he's good.
Yeah, no, just I was going to say that, I like my cocktails just slightly sweet, and then to put a nice lime wedge garnish on there. And that lime wedge, people get, if they like it the way it is, if it's naturally sweet to their palate, they can suck it down and enjoy that. But if they like it a little more tart like I do, I can pick up that lime wedge at 2 o'clock and squeeze it in there and get an extra squeeze of lime. Is that somebody else? Okay, now, the last thing I want to do, we're going to dash our mint. And dash it, all you do is you take your mint, put it in your hands, give it a firm smack. And you put that in at 2 o'clock on the glass. And what that does is it releases the aromatics. And now, I know you guys can't smell it through the screen, but it smells like fresh mint in here. It's beautiful. gonna spank it and put it in there like that. So this is what the traditional classic mint julep would like. I would say, call that a dashed mint julep. You can also put it in a rocks glass. Either way, it is delicious. It's rummy, it's whiskey, it's cognac. It all comes together. Very complex, very delicious, and very easy to balance. It's not a terribly difficult cocktail to get balanced. And you use fresh ingredients, you guys will make the best cocktails in town. You'll be known for making really solid cocktails. So thanks for your time. Now, towards the end, we're going to do a proper tasting of whiskey. So if you want to learn how to properly taste spirits, people think, oh, I can't do cognac or whiskey neat. Come back and see us at that last session, and I'm going to teach you how to do it properly, and it'll be an eye-opening experience, I promise. Thanks for your time, and until our next cocktail together, bottoms up. Cheers.